Hi everyone. Feel free to keep your cameras on. This is an interactive discussion. We're just giving it a couple moments for everyone to join before we get started. Hello everyone who's joining to the next session. This is an interactive session, so feel free to keep your cameras on. Hi, so we're going to get started with our next session, which is an interactive roundtable, continuing the conversation in our beauty and personal care focus at Healthspan, where we'll be discussing the need to know steps to growing a wellness brand. So looking at fundraising, IP, regulation, distribution, and marketing. So before I introduce and hand over to our moderator, just a quick intro about how the session will run. So this is an interactive session, so feel free to keep your cameras on. We want to see your lovely faces, but we also want it to be as interactive as possible. I would just ask that you mute yourself when you're not speaking and when our panelists are speaking. But when you do have a question, you can either pop that directly into the chat box, which you can find at the bottom of your screen, or you can press the raise your hand button, which you can find in your reactions button, which is also at the bottom right of your screen. That way that Galit will be able to ask you to unmute yourself and ask your question directly to our great panelists. So just lastly, if you could also just make sure that your display name on Zoom shows your full name. It's just nice to know where everyone's joining from, and we can have a better discussion that way. So that's enough for me. And I'm just going to hand over to our moderator, Galit Horovitz. Galit is from the co-founder from Welltech Ventures. Thank you, Galit, and over to you.
Hi, good afternoon. So I'm Galit Horovitz, co-founder of Welltech Ventures, a wellness technology-centric fund from Israel. We invest in seed and pre-growth wellness and health startups with tickets that range between $500,000 to $3 million. With us today are Alexia, Inge, co-founder and co-CEO of Cult Beauty, and Lauren Arms, founder of Welltodo. Alexia, Lauren, could you please introduce yourselves?
I'm happy to go first, and Galit, just so you know, your camera's now gone off, so we can't see your lovely face anymore.
Oh, sorry, thank you.
No, you're back. Awesome, cool. I'll jump in. Hi everyone, thanks for joining. Really lovely to have so many of you on here. And thanks so much to Healthspan for having me. I am the founder of Welltodo Global. We are primarily an industry-based content platform. We produce regular content and insights around the business of wellness. So if you were to visit welltodoglobal.com, you would be able to read about the latest investments, consumer trends, insights, developments in the wellness industry globally. We produce a range of annual reports, including our innovation blueprint that spotlights businesses that are innovating and doing things differently in the wellness industry, and also our consumer trend report, which I'm sure we're going to talk about a lot today. And I also work as a business coach, primarily with experts in the wellness industry, so individuals who share and sell their knowledge about wellness as a service. So excited to be here and excited for a great conversation.
Thank you, Lauren.
Well, I can't wait to hear about everything that you're going to be talking about. So yeah, really interested to hear. I am Alexia Inge. I'm the co-founder of Cult Beauty, which I started back in 2008. When we launched the business, we launched it with a well-being section, even though beauty as it was considered at the time and well-being were very rarely sold on the same platform. But I've always considered it a really important part of the journey, of the consumer journey. So yes.
Great. Thank you. So actually, we're hearing a lot about, the influence of COVID-19 on health and wellness trends and consumer behavior. So prior to the pandemic, there was an increase in health awareness and preventive lifestyle. However, it seems that the pandemic accelerated the trend. Alexia, from your point of view, what wellness trends are you witnessing?
One of the first trends that I've spotted actually came a little bit from my own watching my own behavior, And I've phrased it in the trend document that I put together at the beginning of this year as health signaling. It's basically, as we sort of go back to work and get out again into the world, there's a sort of behavioral change where we need to quickly establish our status as healthy with each other. And I think it's something that will start to pervade our ways of speaking, and it's going to affect us along into the future. And it's something that I think will affect how people want to present themselves as well. So looking as healthy as you possibly can. Sales of blusher are up. But actually the trend that I can see that's been driving a lot of consumer change is one I call clinical, which is it's post-pandemic, the evolution of clean beauty, in that it harnesses natural ingredients, but with a parallel focus on lab grown and performance enhancing technology. Brexit killed the expert and pandemic brought it back. People have been very used to listening to scientists, for really important reasons. And I've definitely seen a softening within the consumer on this lab grown clinical front, who so really very ultimately became the baddie over the last 4 years. So there is a sustainability question around it as well, around the use of natural ingredients like essential oils. So the conversation is changing around that. Natural is the only way it has to be, and clinical is bad, or lab grown is bad. So there's a much more of an embracing of a hybrid, hence the name.
There's looking for like science-backed products, not necessarily, clinical.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, we transparency is obviously it's not something that's pandemic based, but it is something the pandemic has definitely lent rocket fuel to. And we have an initiative that we set up with a blockchain platform called Provenance, where we use them to show third-party verification for claims that brands are making. One of the proof points is clinical trials, and we've noticed that so actually getting sort of proper third-party verified rather than 5 people quite like the feel of this product on their skin, we found that actually people clicking on the clinical trials proof points as the most popular one, it's also the one that converts the best. So people are looking for proper scientific proof behind the claims that are being made.
Okay, that's interesting. Lauren, are you seeing the same trends or different ones?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is the question that brings me to life, the trends in the wellness industry for 2021. I try not to speak for too long because I think we can weave some of these into, how consumers are thinking as we continue the conversation. We release a report every year with, our 8 to 10 trends that will define the wellness industry. The big sort of focus was really around the digital consumer. So if we look at every single category within wellness, whether it's beauty or nutrition or fitness or, mental well-being, it's all been impacted by this insurgence of digital consumption. Right. So this new digital consumer is shopping online more. They're obviously working from home. They're willing to, for example, have a remote appointment with a nutritionist, or a remote appointment with a skincare specialist, or, engage with a healthcare professional in a remote environment where many people that would have been very foreign, like we sort of take for granted that we're all used to living in Zoom world now. How many people had never used Zoom before March 2020? And I think the research is showing that 75% of first-time users of digital formats of wellness products and services say that they will continue to do that in their kind of new normal life. So this is a massive acceleration of digital consumption of well-being, whether that's trying a new fitness app at home, whether that's deciding that you're going to order your own personalized healthy meals delivered to home, as opposed to maybe going out to restaurants. You know, we're looking at evidence that shows that 75% of those first-time users are going to continue to have embedded those practices into their life going forward. And when we get to kind of talking about the direction of investment, there are platforms like Ginger in the US, which is a text-based mental health coaching app. So their growth skyrocketed. I mean, their user base grew by 160% of people willing to engage with a mental health practitioner on an app. We all know Peloton, right? The sort of the pin-up of digital fitness. They've seen, you know, a 70% increase in uptake. It was already a very popular product, but we now want to work out from home. So I think to add to Alexia's point, science-backed is a really strong trend this year. And I think that is just the natural evolution of the wellness industry, where 5 or 6 years ago, it was kind of cool to be into wellness, but there wasn't a lot about it that was very measurable. It was more of like that identity marker. It was quite trend driven. Now, you know, more than ever, we are tracking and measuring our progress. You know, it's not just how well do I feel, but what does my sleep tracker say about how well I feel? Should I, you know, change behaviors around sleep or alcohol consumption, or would I feel better if I went plant-based? You know, a lot of this sort of behavior is now really measurable. And so consumers are attracted by brands that have science at their core. So it's not just fluffy wellness, it's real, tangible, evidence-based wellness that is trending, as it were. When we look at kind of other trends, I think a really important one to mention is how much more diversity-driven the wellness industry is becoming. There is still a lot of work to do around this, but I think it's a great point for us to discuss today, because, you know, frankly, 2020 saw an elevation in the conversation around whether it was Black Lives Matter or just a consideration that wellness needs to be an inclusive thing. We're all going through this global pandemic together. And so how can brands consider accessibility, inclusivity in their marketing? And so diversity driven wellness has become a really key conversation as far as trends this year.
Are you seeing a democratization of wellness?
Say that again, sorry.
Are you seeing a democratization of wellness and wellness products?
I think the pressure from consumers is that that's what needs to happen. I don't think we're there yet by any stretch of the imagination, but I think the third trend that we talk about is this collective consciousness, right? Which is that consumers actually expect that brands can solve world issues. It's a big responsibility now, right? And it sounds kind of outrageous, but consumers expect brands to be values driven, to make a statement about global issues, to address diversity, to address you know, environmental impacts of their products, to Alexia's point, to address provenance. Where does your product come from? That's this collective consciousness or awareness around the values of a brand, and that a brand is not just speaking about their values, but is taking action. So is there a democratization of wellness yet? No way, not even close. But the pressure is on brands to make sure that they are not just marketing towards the typical pin-up skinny white female from a high-income background who is drinking green smoothies and wearing Lululemon leggings. You know, like we have to go further than that and say, like, what really is an inclusive version of wellness.
I think within that, there's also making it accessible through being fun, and that's another aspect that hasn't happened so much in the wellness industry, because actually it's a really difficult subject to tackle, because it's serious, but actually making it digestible. And that's part of the democratization of the industry, is taking a very serious subject and presenting it in a fun way. And I think that's getting that right is absolute gold, because no one's really got that. And are you making the price accessible on top of that, then you've really got quite an exciting brand there.
Yeah.
And technology also plays a big role in that.
Sorry?
I'm saying I think that technology plays a big role in the democratization of wellness.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important, though, if you're a brand owner and you're listening to this conversation, that it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be for everybody. The invitation is still for brands to deliver products to specific groups of society. But I think what it says is that there's an opening up of the market where, you know, for example, there's a hugely successful nutrition supplement brand in the US called Hims, and their branding is, you know, made by men for men. Now, technically that's not very inclusive, but for the longest time, supplementation and nutrition has been heavily skewed towards kind of supplements for women, right? And suddenly you've got this brand that is speaking to hair loss for men, impotence in men, you know, being playful and fun and marketing to men in a way that hasn't been done before. So that creates an inclusive angle to well-being. You know, it might be platforms for yoga that are founded by a Black founder and are designed for accessibility to minority groups in society, where it's, you know, potentially a lower price point, or utilizes technology to create a more open platform and conversation, a safer space for those communities. So it's not always, I think, about being all things for all people, but just that brands have this opportunity to think about groups of society that have perhaps been left out when it comes to this conversation about wellness historically.
Right. So Lauren, also from an investor's perspective, in terms of like trends, do you think there's an increase in appetite for wellness technology startups due to the pandemic? And is there like a specific wellness category or sector that interests the investors?
I would say that there are two really hot areas right now. One is connected fitness. So Peloton is a perfect example of this, where you may have a piece of hardware at home, but you're very much kind of plugged into an online community, a software-based system of engaging in fitness content. If we actually look at numbers from 2020, 2021, brands like Tonal, where you have this kind of at-home connected piece of fitness, they raised 110 million in 2020. Mirror, which is again it literally is a mirror that hangs on your wall, and you have an AI-driven, personalized fitness experience with a personal trainer. They were acquired for 500 million. Hydro, which is an at-home rowing system, they raised 25 million. I mean, this idea of kind of connected fitness, what you can do at home, but also still engage with a community in a fitness setting is very attractive to investors right now. And then the second piece, I would say, is kind of mental health apps and technology. So you know, companies like Headspace were still raising money in kind of late 2020, where we saw generally a kind of conservative appetite for investors. You know, those types of brands, online therapy platforms, online nutrition platforms, anything where you can engage with an expert in a specific area of wellness that addressed what we called kind of crisis fatigue, like people just feeling sick of being part of a global pandemic or living in lockdown. The platforms that were able to address the mental well-being side of that were hugely attractive to investors. And so I would say those two areas, which fundamentally are tech-driven.
Right. Okay. So I just want to remind everyone that if you have questions, you're welcome to write them in the chat. So we've covered the trends. So Alexia, what are the first steps a wellness consumer product company needs to take in order to go to market? And also, what are the most important factors that can lead to a successful launch?
I think that the first bit of advice that I speak to anyone starting a brand is don't start a brand to become a multi-millionaire. It's something that I mean, like you can say, this is a little bit of a joke, but also at the same time, it really shines through everything you do, and consumers can really smell it. I think, you know, what's happened as this vertical's become more and more popular and more money has flooded into it, you get a lot more people coming in with very specific 5-year plans to sell. It really, you've got to look for a need. What question are you solving? And that's the question I ask any new brand pitching to come on Cult Beauty is, you know, it doesn't necessarily have to be kind of clear, open, white space, because there isn't a huge amount of that. But really being thoughtful about who your customer is. And as Lauren said, it's like, don't be scared to be niche. Really, you know, if you really focus on what particular problem you're solving and really solve it very well, that will give you a huge head start on companies with much bigger money behind them and resource behind them. So yeah, differentiating is really, really key. So what sets you up differently from the thousands of other brands out there? I think an important, a sustainability story is really important, but also a sustainability pipeline. You know, there is no perfect sustainability process yet, but making that commitment to following all of the innovations that are happening, and they're happening so fast at the moment as finally the penny appears to have dropped. So really making sure that you're communicating that really well. We are, for example, if you're an indie brand, like this is the most sustainable packaging that we can afford to use. We plan to make our pumps 100% recyclable by X. So really kind of thinking about the sustainability innovation journey, as well as the product innovation journey that you're going to go on. And I would have those side by side, because actually having those answers will set you aside apart from so many brands who really aren't thinking like that. They think that just having a recyclable bottle is like the end of it. Building sustainability into your entire sourcing, production process is also really, really key. And just, I mean, also sort of looking at, you know, how your business is run, you know, making sure that everyone is paid equally, you know, being socially sustainable is also really, really important. And if you've got all of that sort of front and center within your story, you're already streets ahead of a lot of other brands out there. I mean, the word authenticity is so overused nowadays, but having a really authentic story behind why you're doing this is something that, you know, consumers have a real sixth sense nowadays. They can understand when something's real and when something's kind of contrived, I guess, to fit a particular trend. Because trends change, and ultimately, if you've got your ear to the ground with your customer and you're really being authentic around what your brand is and why you set it up, you can evolve and change with those trends. If you're just latching onto a trend because there's volume there, it's not a long-term business model.
Right.
What was the second
Lauren,
one?
would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, you've really covered a lot of it there, Alexia. I agree. You know, it's no longer viable to come to the wellness industry just with a passion. Let's be honest, that's a really strong foundation, but it also has to be innovative. You know, the number of times I see people say, you know, we've got the first kind of gluten-free granola in the market, and it's like, unfortunately not the first, that has been done. We need to really be forward thinking, and that innovation coupled with a very clear omni-channel approach to both online and offline, especially coming back to what this new normal. How are you reaching consumers through a very robust online strategy, whether that's direct to consumer or simply through the power of social media? But also coming out of a pandemic, frankly, we're all going to crave experience and real human connection more than ever. And so you've got to have that offline aspect to your strategy clearly mapped out as well. I think to your point, Alexia, clarity on values and purpose. Once upon a time, it was, let's create a mission statement, publish it on our website, and then we're good to go. We live in a world now of, cancel culture, right? Which, for anyone not familiar with that term, is basically, if you don't get it right, you will get called out. You will get called out by your consumers, and you will get vilified by the internet, whether they are consumers or not. You've kind of got to have a robustness to your purpose-led strategy to truly be purpose-led. And that's exciting because, it elevates the industry. We truly get fantastic products that are well thought out and solve real problems. And frankly, the wellness industry should be held to that standard. But interestingly, recent research showed that, consumers are 4 times more likely to purchase from a brand with a clear purpose. Right? They're also 6 times more likely to protect that brand in a challenging moment. What's that challenging moment I'm talking about? It's where, perhaps if a brand does suddenly get vilified online, it's consumers come and protect it, right? And come and stand up for it and rally behind it when they get something wrong. It's a silly example, but, last year, SoulCycle got caught up in this sort of political scandal where one of their investors was tied to Donald Trump's campaign. And suddenly, all the Democratic SoulCyclers came out in force to, vilify the brand. And at the same time, there were supporters coming to back up SoulCycle and say, that's not what they're about. And it was this sort of online war between the brand loyalists and the brand critics. And so you've got to understand how to navigate that. To the point of kind of last year's Black Lives Matter campaign, the brands who stayed silent were vilified because it was deemed, that silence was a form of inaction. So, not only just having a mission statement for your website, but really understanding where you stand on global issues, where you stand on sometimes political issues, where you stand on social issues. And that kind of stems to this piece around having a diversity and inclusion strategy. If you are going to be for a particular niche, really being able to justify that, really being strong in your statement that we are for this group. It all ties back to the trends that we've talked about. It's making sure that your product is validated in the market. So once upon a time, I think anyone could launch a supplement brand and probably, get reasonable success. I think now if you don't have a certified board of nutritionists and dietitians and scientists behind your product, it simply won't fly because consumers, demand that level of validation of a product now, which again, I think is fantastic for the wellness industry, which is, technically not a regulated market in a lot of ways because it sort of doesn't fit quite into health, sort of sits on the peripheral as being, about general well-being, but there's a pressure now that things do need to be substantiated. And if you can't do that, it's probably about bringing in other experts to an advisory board or a board of advisors that can support your business through some of those more kind of challenging consumer queries.
Right. So Lauren, you mentioned marketing strategy of online and offline. So could you explain a little more, like what, in terms of the platforms, what do you think are the most useful for wellness brands? So would it be, Facebook or Google, Instagram? Is it to use influencers or any other platforms that you know of?
Yeah, I mean, I honestly think all of these platforms are great for different purposes, and I think fundamentally a lot of new brands make the mistake of trying to be across all platforms instead of really honing the strategy and being clear on maybe one or two. So there are some fantastic brands, and I'm sure Alexia, you've seen loads of these in kind of beauty and skincare that have kind of jumped on TikTok and just gone hard after a TikTok audience and really perfected that as a social media channel for teens or tweens or whoever the next generation is after that. I can't keep up. And have largely skipped Instagram because for that audience it's not so relevant. I think there's value in all of these channels, right? It's sort of, what are your brand objectives? Are influencers right for you? Again, it kind of comes down to your kind of business objectives as to whether that's the right fit or even fits kind of your budgetary constraints as well. But I'm sure, Alexia, you've got insights as well.
Probably add to that building your own community, because all of those marketing platforms that you mentioned are getting increasingly expensive, and especially as more and more people move online, the fight for eyeballs is real. So actually, I mean, this all comes back to that kind of core reason for being and who your customer is. So you look at who that person is. Where are they? Where are they online? What are they reading? I mean, it could be an offer, it could be a newspaper. Maybe it isn't an online platform that you need to be looking at, depending on the demographic and the niche that you're focused on. But building your own community, and I think there's an increasing need for brands to become their own media platform.
How would you recommend new brands to create such a community?
So one of the ways of doing it is through partnerships with other kind of non-competing but like thinking brands. And that's, I mean, it's something that we used a lot when building Cult Beauty, because we didn't have very much money for marketing. So it really was about, who can we partner with that has an audience that we can bring value to with content, for example, or advice or competitions or whatever, and actually just think in a partnership way. Because actually, if you find sort of like thinking brands that already have an audience, it's going to be quite likely that it's going to be a more relevant audience to you than if you just do a sort of blanket advertising on Facebook, even if it's sort of like for like audiences. There is something about a friend recommendation that is 10 times stronger and more valuable than something that comes to you sort of in your feed. So I mean, building the community like that, it's all about like, what can I give? Like, what do these people want? What would they see as valuable? And answering that question, then people come to you, I think. But advice and content around well-being is definitely a great place to start.
It's really that kind of resourcefulness, isn't it, Alexia? So many brands just don't have the big budgets that Instagram and Facebook demand that would get you results nowadays. They really kind of lured us in with their free platform, and suddenly now you really can't get traction unless you're spending big dollars. But I love that idea of kind of resourcefulness, of partnerships with brands that are like-minded. And we see so much of that in kind of the wellness ecosystem, whether it's, let's say Headspace partnered with 5 or 6 airline brands last year. So suddenly you've got kind of convergence of mental health technology and travel, or, a sleep app that partners with a beauty brand, whatever it might be, or femcare brand. There are so many really nice kind of, if you look at the big picture of the wellness industry and its bigger picture ecosystem, there are so many opportunities to kind of cross-pollinate with other sectors within wellness to really reach your correct audience and target market. But a great example I heard recently was a company in the US called Thrive Market, which, kind of speaking of democratizing wellness, are basically bringing healthy food and drink items to the masses at lower prices, which is fantastic. And they sort of realized they wanted to work with influencers as a key part of their strategy, but didn't have the budget to pay influencer fees. So they actually made their influencers shareholders within their organization. So they gave away a share to 10 or 12 credible influencers they felt aligned with their brand. And all on the same day, you know, these 10 or 12 extremely influential people announced, you know, the launch of Thrive Market, and that was their launch strategy. So that's the kind of resourcefulness that I'm talking about. It's like, okay, well, we can't afford to pay influencers, but can we offer them something else? Can we grow with smaller influencers as they become more powerful influencers, and kind of not assume that we're going to get the celebrity on board, but that we can kind of use a bunch of micro influencers to get the same impact. And it's that kind of creativity and resourcefulness and ingenuity that I think a lot of wellness brands need. Because frankly, you know, in the early days, you just don't have the budget to do huge marketing campaigns and be paying for Facebook and Google ads, even if that was the best way of reaching your audience.
So Lauren, what would you say are the necessary tips to converting leads into clients?
I mean, so again, I think it's this cycle of giving value. So to Alexia's point, you know, the how-to and the teaching about your product and service, that educational element. So this kind of fits into this digital trend of, you know, online consumption, right? More and more, we're seeing growth in the online education and learning space. So even if you're a product-based brand, you're almost now in the business of educating consumers as well. How do you use the product? Why should you use this product? You know, what other elements of your life and your personal well-being should you be thinking about? Creating meaningful content. And I think as long as you have a clear kind of give strategy, but attached to that, you also have a really strong kind of lead generation strategy. So what we would call a really effective sales funnel, where you guide your consumer through a clear journey of, you know, here's a motivation to sign up to our community, to join our community, to download this free education, you know, piece, that you are then very clear on how you take that consumer on a journey of education through to purchase. And it's a very difficult question to answer in a generalized way because of the nuances of every product or service. But I think fundamentally it's about first showcasing the value that you have to offer in the wellness space as an educator and as a brand that educates its audience and provides more than just a product or service. And that then there's a clear strategy that guides them step by step into a purchase funnel. And that will be done in, you know, in lots of different ways, depending on whether you are product service based, online, offline. It's kind of a nuanced area that's difficult to provide a general answer on. Yeah.
So Alexia, every success story has its hurdles. So what are the main pitfalls you are seeing? Is it undeveloped data strategies, privacy, regulation, or wrong product market fit, or, you know, any other aspect that you're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I think thinking a little bit more internationally when it comes to compliance is always a good start with health and well-being, because it does tend to vary quite massively. I mean, even in the EU, what you can and can't say and what you can and can't sell. And I think CBD is probably the best example of this, because currently we're seeing territories be shut on a weekly basis at the moment. So sometimes ingredients will affect that, but having a good understanding of how compliancy works in the markets you want to target in the next 5 years is probably a good start. I mean, the pitfalls: promising too much and not delivering it, council culture soon. It's a bit sort of law of the jungle in that particular way. I think, you know, don't be scared to say that this is a journey. I think sort of telling that story about where you want to be, but where you are, and admitting that where you are isn't necessarily perfect. Actually, there's something really attractive about it, and I've seen brands do that very well, especially because we're coming from the indie angle that is our focus. But yeah, over promising and not delivering is a big pitfall. Making sure that you do your market research, and Laura mentioned about the granola. We get so many brands contacting us with the same story, and you're just thinking in your head, like, guys, did you not just Google that at one point before you threw all your money? Because it's amazing how many people don't. so just,
how many
press
releases do you get, Alexia, that say world first?
I mean, it's all of them, really.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's making sure that you kind of understand that what you are saying, and whether that's to a retailer or to your customer, is absolutely spot on, is really, really key. Other pitfalls, yes, spending too much on generalized marketing, I think is a huge issue. And we were very tentative with the money that we brought on at Colt. Finding the right partner, it's so like dating, getting money in, you know, you've got to sort of have a real understanding and feel for the person that you are partnering with, and understanding that your needs and wishes for the brand are completely aligned at the beginning is really key. Because I think where I've seen investors and founders diverge in what they want for the brand, that's another thing that can go very wrong, and it's stuff that's all happening in the background that you never see as a consumer, but you can kind of feel that there's a conflict somewhere there in the brand. Yeah, I think that's
okay. Lauren, would you like to add on that?
No, you know, I think you've really kind of covered it there, and I think we're going to get to sort of talking about PR. I think you're right in that point of not to overspend on kind of generalized marketing. It comes back to kind of my point on resourcefulness, but I think, you know, I think there's a sense of, okay, if we throw enough cash at this marketing campaign or this PR campaign, you know, something will stick, will suddenly get traction. And actually, it's really about being creative and being truly innovative in the marketplace. And that is becoming harder and harder, but I think that's a fantastic challenge for new founders to rise to. And
when do you think is it the right time for startups to start thinking about PR?
I mean, it wouldn't be a priority for me if I was advising a new startup to spend, you know, thousands of money on a PR retainer. And apologies if there are any PR consultants on the call that don't want to hear that. I think PR has its place, but, you know, I'll give you a great example. I host a podcast called The Business of Wellness, which, if anybody's interested in the stories behind some of the world's most successful wellness businesses, check it out on Spotify or iTunes. It's called The Business of Wellness Podcast. I was talking to a UK startup called Dame, and they produce organic, sustainable femcare products, so tampons and liners and so on for their customers. And you know, when they launched, they didn't pay for any PR, but they got a huge amount of PR. Why? Because their product was truly unique. It was truly, they launched the world's first reusable applicator for tampons, and they got media traction because it was an interesting story. You can pay journalists to write about you, or you can actually create a story that is interesting enough to be written about. You know, journalists are always looking for exciting new headlines. And so I think it's this difference in approach of, instead of paying someone to try and make your brand look good in the market, do it yourself, you know, like make your brand look good by being different and unique and creative. And similarly,
That's an excellent tip.
Sorry?
I'm saying that's an excellent tip.
Yeah, and their approach was also to uncover a whole bunch of research about how many chemicals and bleaches and pesticides were in female health products and sanitary products. And as a result, that content got published and attributed to Dame. And so as a small startup, they were suddenly being written about everywhere without spending a single cent. And I think that's where PR is fantastic, but not necessarily something you want to be hemorrhaging cash for in the early days of a business. I'd be focusing on creating a fantastic product or service that is, you know, that journalists want to try and write about.
Right. So there's a question here from the audience. I'll read it out to you. So I'm at the point of wanting to scale my gut health startup, but don't have the funds and often the guidance or confidence. Did either of you explore accelerator options in the early days of your business or take VC funding?
I didn't. We didn't take VC funding. We spoke to a few VCs, and we were very, very green. Ended up we brought on some angel funding, which you know, some of the angels had some experience in e-commerce, which really helped us. Generally, in today's market, I would recommend being as slow as you can on the bringing funding in, because actually, if you've built a brand, if you've built some online real estate, some brand capital, the negotiation is so much easier than if you're coming. I mean, if it's part of your seed strategy, it's a very different thing. But actually having an entity to sell that you're confident in it's a much easier conversation. You'll give away much less of your business, and you'll also buy yourself more time to be able to give away more of your business for later on when it might be needed. But you know, there's some pretty unsure times ahead of us. I think really focusing on that grassroots driven growth, or bringing on smaller bits of money. I think patience is definitely a skill there.
Great. Thank you, Alexia. So actually we're out of time, but I wanted to thank you all for joining us. And Alexia and Lauren, your experience and tips that you have shared with us today are highly appreciated. And I just want to thank everyone. Lauren, Alexia, do you want to say a few words? Or?
No, I mean, it is really interesting. I'm going to go and have a listen to your podcast, Lauren. It sounds like it'd be great fun.
Well, you'd be very welcome as a guest as well. For those interested in kind of the trends that we see, I've just dropped a link into the chat for our latest trends report. But it's been a really nice conversation. I hope that you've all enjoyed it, and feel free to connect with me on the various platforms, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook. I'd love to hear your feedback from the session, and thanks, Galit, for hosting.
Thank you. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Alexia.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye. Take care.
Thank you, guys.